There was Hood, there was Jesus, there was Mary, peace be upon them. All the things that had been the cornerstones of my very early upbringing and very much the sort of value systems that my family had. And yet they were told in a way that answered all the concerns I'd had previously. For example, the decision to take from the Tree of Knowledge. That was a joint decision. It wasn't some evil woman had actually come in and led this bloke astray. And particularly the prophet Jesus, peace be upon him. I had always been concerned that from what I was taught at Bible studies and at Sunday school and at church, that everything pointed to the fact that this was a man, an enormously important man, and a man with an incredible message, but a human being. And I'd never been able to reconcile the sort of slide through to divinity, even though the church I was brought up in, we didn't believe in the Trinity. But there was still aspects of divineness being given that I didn't ever feel comfortable with, because the stories didn't match. And once I got over my shock, which was pretty massive, my next feeling was to feel ashamed because of my ignorance, and not just my ignorance, but the ignorance of the community in which I lived. And the fact that we were talking about the same God, Subhanahu wa ta'ala, the God of Abraham. This is what I would have said previously was New Zealand's God, and yet we didn't even know this. And that was really, really strong. And as I continued to read, it wasn't very long before it became very apparent to me, and I really am insufficiently articulate to express exactly how this felt, but it became very apparent to me that what I was reading was the truth, and the truth in the most profound sense was staring me in the face. I didn't tell anybody else about this at the time. I finished reading the Quran, and in translation obviously, and then I read it again. And after the second time through, I decided to do quite a lot of research on the internet and look at how one became Muslim, what one did, how one behaved, and the general implications. And I had a great deal of difficulty finding information other than the very basics, like the 5 pillars. Information about how to pray, those sort of things I actually found quite difficult. This is, again, in the very early 90s, and things have changed since. And I remember finding a couple of articles which said you have to make, and there was an Arabic character. And I was thinking, what's that? And they was talking about before prayer you make. And I managed to find a translation engine and put it in, and it said wudu. And I thought, okay, so what is this wudu? And it took me probably about another 3 weeks to find that was ritual cleansing, but it took much, much longer to establish what one actually did and how to actually go about this. And these days, a lot of people are quite shocked that sort of basic information was very hard to find. And I also found all sorts of sites which said all sorts of things that contradicted each other. But one of the most constant threads throughout was that a conversion to Islam was not something to be done in a hurry. This was something to think about, this was something to research, this was something to be absolutely sure of yourself before you actually took the Shahada. I finally took the Shahada in October 2000, having told my family just a little while before that I was planning to. My immediate family, because there's only a very small number of them in New Zealand now, because we have dual passports, so we can work in the EU. And those that were left in New Zealand, all 2 of them, were very supportive. My mum, in fact, took me on a business trip to Melbourne with her so I could go and buy hijab clothes, because at that point in time in Wellington there wasn't a shop selling hijab for ladies. And I remember my delight when I went into Brunswick and Melbourne, and all these shops selling salami because salami was one of the things I really missed, because that was about 6 months after I'd become Muslim, and I could buy salami at this shop and this shop and this shop, and I had all sorts of options with clothes. The rest of my family overseas, their attitude initially was, yeah, whatever, fine, but there wasn't any sort of cognizance taken of it. It didn't alter what sort of things they gave me, or whether they gave me Christmas presents, or whether they gave me things that were haram, like I was given a wine holder by one of my relatives. And but a few years ago, that has actually changed over time, as they've sort of worked out that this is not a fad, that this is something that I'm actually living my life as. And a few years ago, one of our family elders, a very conservative lady in Hamilton, she started giving me for Christmas presents headscarves that I thought was just wonderful, and a wonderful compromise, because it honoured her faith in that she was giving a gift to someone she loved at Christmas, and she also honoured mine. And she didn't ever say anything. As far as I'm aware, she's never even commented to me or anyone else about me becoming Muslim. And I just thought that was just wonderful. Of my friends, most of them were, yeah, whatever, you know what you're doing. Whereas there were two who got very deeply concerned. One was the lady who'd told me, nearly 15 years earlier, that I would find my way to God. And she was initially enormously distressed, until it actually occurred to me that I needed to tell her that this was the God of Abraham, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And her first reaction was, no, it's not. And I said, well, yes, it is. We start with this, and then there's this, and actually went through. There's no way she'd read the Quran, but she's come to a point where not only has she accepted that is where I've found peace, but that she can see it's a very good thing. And I think that's huge. One of my other friends, the other one who became very upset initially, and again, she was upset because she was concerned for me. She felt that it was all because of my disability and meant that I was falling apart, and some cult had got hold of me and sort of filled my head with stuff. And she